Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first ever PGS Speaker Series. My name is Luke Rees. I'm one of the deputy heads here at PGS, and it's my privilege to welcome you all to this exciting event. As many of you will know, we are incredibly proud of our OP network here at PGS, and also incredibly proud that it's not just a school. PGS is actually a learning community. And working with OPs and various other friends of the school, we work really hard to ensure that it is a richer educational experience for everyone involved. So that's quite enough from me already this evening. You are going to be hosted by our three wonderful prefects, Sam, Daisy and Manon. So I'm going to hand straight over to Manon, and she is going to introduce our speaker this evening.
Hi everyone, so I'm Manon. I'm a prefect in year 13 at PGS, and it is my pleasure to introduce Sybella from the UN. And Sybella was at PGS from 1987 to 1989, and she started her career with the UNHCR in Kenya in 1992 and worked on the Somali refugee crisis as a press officer. So this is sort of just an overview of what Sybella has done. So she's worked with some amazing organisations like the Associated Press, National Geographic, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which is mandated to aid and protect refugees, quite self-explanatory, and has worked in places all over the world like Syria, Geneva and Kigali. And now Sybella works as a senior communications officer and change advisor at the UNHCR. So without further ado, just a quick mention at the end, we have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask and we'll make sure we get around to them at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Manon. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say that I do think I was so lucky to come to PGS. I was living on the Isle of Wight and I was given the opportunity to come to school at Portsmouth. It involved a hovercraft trip to school every day, and I was one of the first girls to go to the school. And it's so wonderful to see how PGS has just gone from strength to strength, but it was already an amazing school and I got an amazing education, and that really was the foundation for me. And and also I think there was very much a spirit of adventure at PGS that I've carried with me into my career. So I'm really pleased today to have the opportunity to share with you a bit about the organisation that I work with, UNHCR, and then to encourage you, all of you, not just those of you studying international relations or politics, but really across the board, from engineering, law, international relations, medicine, to really encourage you all to consider a career with the UN. So how about I dig in? I'll start with this picture actually of this little boy. He's called Omar. He was 3 when we took this picture, and he was in a refugee camp in Lebanon. He's called Omar, and he was born on the first day, on the day that there were the big demonstrations that we mark as the first day of the Syria crisis, March 15th, 2011. We found him in this camp with his wonderful family. He's since been resettled to Canada. So at the time I was working as a spokesperson and communications officer, and one of the key things that we would do is try and find people like Omar and other families that people can really connect and understand their situation, because the next slide, these numbers are huge. 82.4 million people worldwide were displaced at the end of 2020. We're always 6 to 9 months behind in terms of our numbers of counting, because it's all agreed with governments so that we're really accurate. So this is more, to put this into context, this is more than the population of the UK or of France. This is an entire nation of people who are not protected by their governments, either internally displaced or outside, seeking protection outside of their countries. So we'll move on to the next slide. So of that number, 2/3 of refugees, and this is a funny formulation, Venezuelans displaced abroad, because some of them are considered migrants, some of them are refugees. They come from just 5 countries, and that's Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. So a massive number of the refugee population comes from just these 5 countries. But the largest number are actually displaced in their own countries. If you can go to the next slide, Lily. Thanks. So that's 48 million people are actually displaced within their own countries. So most of the world's forcibly displaced haven't left their own country but need support because they're facing problems with their own governments. They're facing persecution within their own borders. So some of our biggest operations are actually within these conflict-ridden countries. The next slide. And of that number, 40 children, basically, girls and boys under the age of 18, account for 42% of all the forcibly displaced. So, and within that, and I know this is mind-boggling numbers, 1 million children were born refugees in the last 3 years. So we're really dealing with a very young population of people, massive number of school-aged children, whether they're internally displaced or refugees. So the next slide. So for my organisation, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UN Refugee Agency, we'll go to the next slide. This is what we're working towards, a world where refugees thrive, not just survive. And basically the perception of refugees is actually a really incorrect one, that people think of refugees living in camps, people think of refugees living in a temporary situation, but the average length of displacement is over 18 years. So the average length of time that many people spend in exile is over 18 years, so an entire childhood or one's productive working life. So what do we aim to achieve? We'll go to the next slide. So in the first place, we do the first pillar of our work is survival and response. It is people that are fleeing new crises. It is access to territory and asylum and protection for people on the move. But the vast majority are in the next pillar, which is number 2, which is actually solidarity with people once they fled, their education, their economic inclusion, which means being allowed to work, encouraging their talents, their as with all children, you want to encourage their talent and their ability to innovate. And then of course it's really important, the third pillar, which is and I think that there's a misconception about many refugees and displaced people, but the vast majority of people, all they want is to be able to go home safely. So, but in some cases that means, home isn't safe. So that means integration in the place where they've sought refuge. The vast majority of people who fled their own countries live in neighbouring countries. Then there's resettlement, like the little boy Omar you saw on the first page, where countries offer the vulnerable families a new home. Then return, and then there's another category. We have a crisis of anything from 4 to 10 million people. Of course, they're not counted because they're stateless, so they don't have documents, and that's a big priority for us to try and end statelessness. Okay, we'll move on to the next. So. Part of my work and the work of my colleagues is to change the conversation. So we did a big study a couple of years ago where we surveyed populations that have received large numbers of refugees and populations that are very fearful of refugees. In this case, we work with a huge number of different media organisations to link them with people like Jermaine Dosset, who is a police officer in the US. You know, to really tell the story of, you know, basically the counter story, with a lot of people associating refugees with violence, when in fact what they've done is fled violence. We've realised that what we need to do is go beyond preaching to the converted and reach out to people with genuine worries about whether it's security, whether it's about their cultures changing, whether it's about the economic strain that people fear. So tell those stories that feature members of their own communities and actually reflect their own values. So that's one example. And then another project that we worked on was this wonderful mayor in Germany who actually saw refugees as an opportunity. Germany, like the UK and many European countries, has a aging population. And what he saw was that actually to energize industry in his city and to encourage economic growth, they were going to actually, the arrival of refugees was an opportunity. And you know, some of the work that he's done and other mayors, there's been economic studies that have actually found that the arrival of 1 million plus Syrian refugees has helped bolster the German economy, but has also helped fill gaps in really crucial areas like the healthcare, the areas of healthcare, the areas of transport, logistics, and then agriculture, in where the economy was really struggling to hire the right people. So moving on. So working with the UN. This is just because you've got wonderful young minds, and it's just, you know, it's one of the great strengths of the UN that really the basic requirements are that you have 2 UN languages. It's now to even get onto our rosters, you have to have the certificates of speaking the languages. So I really encourage you. It's not just for working with the UN, but it's a fantastic opportunity to really have an insight into a whole different culture. But that's really a must, and you'll find it much easier if you do it now rather than later. I'm speaking from experience. You need a bachelor's degree, you need 2 years of experience. If you were to choose to do an internship, you can do that from the end of your 2nd year at university, and there are paid internship opportunities. Okay, onwards. Then one of my team members, Pauline Elouer, this has become one of our big priorities. We know that the Malalas of the world, the young activists, the Gretas of the world, we'd like to have the equivalent in the refugee world. So we have what we call the Model United Nations Refugee Challenge. And last year there were over 100,000 students that formed challenges based had motions at their MUNs based on this refugee challenge. And we have a whole area, you'll find it there, the link on our website, where you can sign up, and we send you cool stuff as well for it. So we can move on to the next one. I think you guys have got MUN, so you know that it follows the UN rules and procedures. Now, when you follow this, we actually carry through, and the winning teams, actually, we bring to our executive committee their ideas, and we have, you know, and we document that. So it's not for nothing that, you know, it's a very good process for learning to debate the issues, but it also does lead, you know, is taken into consideration the arguments that are put forward by the winning teams. So let's move to the next one. And here's just a little video to tell you a bit more about it. Yeah, so that's something that you can do already to learn more about refugees and more about the world and the work that we're doing, and to engage with my organisation. So I think that's it for me, but I'm ready for any questions that you might have.
Sorry, thank you very much. So I had a look at the chat. I can't see too many, so I'm just going to hand over to Sam.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Right, brilliant. Hi, thank you. So I'm Sam. I'm one of the head prefects at the Portsmouth Grammar School, and I've just been here making sure that everything's going all right. And also, I'm planning on doing history and international relations at uni, so this is definitely a talk that's right up my alley. So I just want to talk a little bit about the refugee crisis in Europe in particular. And Sybella, how do you think that Brexit has affected the way the UK has taken in refugees in particular?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I would say is that as a official at the UN, the most important thing is that I'm always impartial and that everyone is impartial. So what I can say objectively, looking at the UK, is that the UK has had a policy of a resettlement scheme and has resettled about 20,000 refugees. But there is very much this approach of if people don't arrive in a regular way, I think we're seeing people treated in quite a rough way. And it's something that, as a British citizen, that does absolutely concern me. Whether that's impacted by Brexit or not, potentially, I guess, it could be that it's impacted by Brexit. It could be that it's government policy. So I think that what's really important is to look at who's coming and what their rights are. And the vast majority of people that are coming, when their refugee claims are heard, they are found to have fled persecution. They are found to be in need of international protection. And I think it's absolutely terrible that these people have to resort to incredibly dangerous measures in order to, in many cases, rejoin family and to find their safety. All of that said, the smuggling network that is behind putting people at risk, this is something that we really believe, that this, people should not profit from people's misery. And people are spending a fortune. They're spending all their money and all their family's money to get on dangerous boats and risk their lives. And that's something that we're absolutely committed to working against. We'd like safe solutions. We'd like safe pathways. We'd like, it's absolutely absurd that people have to get on a boat, and that if the end result is going to be that they're given asylum, that there has to be a better way of cooperating. I think there's also a very dangerous precedent that we see trying to outsource the issue of refugees. And we see billions being given to nations like Libya in order to contain refugees. And these countries are conflict-ridden themselves. And that those are quite questionable choices. So I think it's really complex. There's not one simple solution, and there's definitely legitimate fears and concerns. But in the end, we do ask that people remember that the people that are getting on these boats have fled war and persecution in the most part, and are putting their lives at risk because that's what they consider to be their only option to reach a place that they consider to be safe. And I don't think they should be criminalised for that.
Thank you. I was just going to ask a question, and then we can move on to people who've asked them in the Q&A. We've got quite a few now. So this is more of a hypothetical question. But I was wondering, obviously, there are advantages to having borders around the world, because it means that every country can have their own kind of contained culture and then contained state. And it provides the kind of thing that refugees have to get over, and ensures that most of the time they're free from harm when they are fleeing persecution. But then on the other hand, you could argue that actually having those barriers creates another hurdle for them to get over. So it's very ideological, but I was wondering if you are actually in favour of having borders at all.
I think I'm in favour of countries having their national identity and their rights, and I can totally respect how countries want to protect their borders, protect their rights. But at the same time, I think that the Refugee Convention is in place for people that don't have a government to protect them. So people are left with no other option than to flee, and that's why the United Kingdom and some 128 countries have signed the Refugee Convention to commit to protecting people that are forced to flee. 70 years ago, the Refugee Convention was set up precisely to solve the refugee crisis in Europe. And I think we shouldn't forget that. It was set up, it was very, very close to home 70 years ago. And now this is not, when refugees do arrive on our shores, it is the absolute minority. So I think that borders are absolutely valid, but understanding that people that are fleeing persecution deserve access and deserve to hear their asylum claim. I think that that's the balance.
So I was wondering if we could go on to some of the ones in the Q&A now. So we've got one that says, what is the impact of countries refusing refugee settlements on the refugee population?
Well, I think one of the most devastating things that we see is when families are divided. And I mean, one of the most painful things that I've witnessed is when you have these really strict policies as to who can be reunited with their family. So you'll have a family, let's say, with 3 children, and one of them's 19, one of them's 17, one of them's 15. The 17 and 15-year-old are allowed to reunite with the father or mother, and the 19-year-old is considered an adult and is left in it, in that scenario, what is that 19-year-old going to do? Are they going to stay in exile, or are they going to try and reunite with their families? So those kind of restrictive policies, I think, are really painful.
So another one here. Sorry, so from Miss Bushell, which says, how did you get into this line of work? So was it when you were at PGS, or was it later down the line, or did you have any other plans before then?
Well, I'm half South African, and when I went to Durham University, and I had this idea when I graduated, I wanted to work on issues of the environment. So I went, it was the Rio conference, which was one of, back in the day, climate change and the environment weren't very popular topics. But anyway, I was really lucky. Durham sponsored me to do an internship. I secured the internship in the speechwriting team of the UN Environment Programme, and a trust supported me to go for a few months. And it's funny how actually sometimes you do a job and you think it's what you want and you think it's your dream. And I actually discovered, being in this, beautiful, fantastic city of Nairobi, working in a headquarters, because the UN Environment Programme was the headquarters, I really felt I was so dislocated from the actual substance of the work. And at the time there was the Somalia refugee crisis, and I was sent on a one-day assignment to go and report on the environmental impacts of refugees. And I went on a little plane with a group of journalists up to the northern border of Kenya, where refugees were crossing. And I met a number of UNHCR staff. I saw the work that they were doing. So when I finished my internship, rather than carrying on to a job at UNEP, which would have been a good thing, and they were doing important work, I volunteered and ended up doing a maternity cover to work with UNHCR, and I was pretty much, and it was just the most wonderful opportunity to work with some of the most extraordinary people, and I just felt completely motivated, completely and utterly motivated by it. And during that time, when my colleague was on maternity leave, when she came back, I was offered the opportunity to go on what they called the UN emergency team. And at the time, they thought that Burundi was close to collapse, so we were a team that was ready and poised. And then the Rwanda genocide happened, and I was immediately sent with the emergency team, and we went first to the border, the Tanzanian border, and then I was amongst the first group of people to go in. We went in May, and a very small group of humanitarians. And I was the press officer for the humanitarian system then, and I worked, and it was 6 months, day and night of horror that I can't even describe to you all. And that was really, and I didn't question for a minute while I was doing it, but I did know that I had to leave when it was done. So when essentially it was time for the development actors to come in and the emergency workers to leave, I made the decision to leave the UN. So I left the UN, and because I thought it had been a very hard experience, and I also thought I need to have a solid, if I'm going to do this line of work, I need to be properly trained. So I left, and I wanted to, at the time I was very interested in learning Arabic and studying journalism. So I had a complete career swap and worked as a freelancer with Associated Press Television, studied my master's in television at the American University in Cairo, and studied Arabic. So my career has done that kind of thing when it's needed to. So I worked as a journalist in Cairo, and then I moved to America, where I worked Washington, DC. I was one of the journalists that covered 9/11, unfortunately. I definitely didn't sign up for a career of only dealing with massive global tragedies, but that's not even funny, but it's, anyway, I did that. And then after that experience in Washington, DC, my husband and I, because he'd also worked in the Rwanda genocide, we really felt it was important. It was something that had kind of, it was always in our minds. And we thought the best thing to do was to go back and to do a positive job. So we went back, and my husband worked in kind of refugee, in a refugee job, and I worked in on a communications job with the US government to bring business to Rwanda, work with companies like Starbucks and Green Mountain Coffee, Macy's, and basically to bring these big projects in to help their economic recovery. So my career has taken, we've basically gone with the flow, and my husband and I have always had a fascination with the Middle East. So from Rwanda, we moved to Syria, where I was the regional spokesperson for the Iraq crisis during that time, and that was, a fascinating time. But again, working in a country, it wasn't in conflict. We left in 2009, but it was going downhill at that time, and with 3 children at that point. Again, it was a good idea to make a change. So in 2009, moved to the beautiful stability of Geneva in Switzerland to take up the position of global spokesperson. So, I mean, it's one of the amazing things about an international career, that you can have so much variety, that you can experience from field work all the way through to kind of headquarters. I mean, I've got a management job now, but, also working as a global spokesperson is a thrilling and fascinating and motivating job. So, long answer there.
Sorry, no, that's great, thank you. Another one from Miss Bushell. It was one of the first ones on, so I thought you should reply. So there's a perception that the UK attracts an unusually high number of refugees. Is that actually true, and if so, why? No,
actually, the UK has a relatively small number compared to the overall number. And in fact, Europe as a whole, you know, Europe has over 500 million people, and it's a very small percentage. The vast majority, it's 92% of refugees live in bordering countries, and these are majority low income and middle income countries. So and in many cases maintain open borders for refugees. So the perception and the reality are quite different. That said, I do sympathise with you know, the circumstances that people are arriving in. You know, an unmanaged way, it can feel overwhelming, and there's no doubt that that there needs to be better solutions. I would advocate for more opportunities for people to travel legally, so they don't have to take these dangerous journeys.
Thank you. I think we have time for 2 more now. So the next one is, how do you tackle the reunification of families at the UNHCR?
Yeah, so we have a huge staff of people involved in resettlement, and then also and one of the categories for being resettled is because you're separated from your family. It's actually a really long process, and we wish we had our own island state, but we always depend on governments offering us places. And you know, those governments have very, very strict security rules. It can take up to 2 years for somebody who's been accepted to go through all the security protocols. So you're probably going to have the safest person you can possibly imagine after they've gone through all of that, all of the checks. So we basically, the job of our resettlement colleagues is to help go through and find, you know, who needs resettlement, help find the appropriate solution, and then also help those governments go through those security checks. And then we have other organisations that help us with the travel, the International Organisation of Migration, IOM. And then at the other end, there's often NGOs, non-governmental organisations, that are there at the other end to welcome refugees and to help them to integrate in. So it's a whole team work.
Thank you. And the last question, it's quite a complicated one, is there a need for an interreligious dialogue in your communications and integration when refugees are settling into new communities?
That's such a great question, and absolutely yes, because we actually know that faith leaders, they're so important in terms of you know, a lot of the communities that welcome refugees, they are faith-based, but then a lot of the communities that are fearing refugees, that, you know, there's a tinge of, you know, fear about whether this is going to impact their faith, and it's definitely, we really want to bring together people of all faiths. We want to bring together faith leaders. We know in the refugee communities that we serve that faith leaders serve an incredibly important role in terms of supporting refugees, but also bridging to the broader community. So that's, yeah, really good question, whoever asked that.
I think that's all we've got time for now. So on behalf of everyone, I'd really like to say thank you very much for coming. It was really inspirational, really interesting. So I'm definitely considering a career in the UN. You'll be happy to know. And just remind everyone that's watching that this is a speaker series, so there will be some one another time. So keep your eyes peeled on social media and the PGS newsletter as well. And thank you very much, Sybella, for coming.
Oh, that's my pleasure, and really, really wonderful. And good luck, all of you, with your university applications and your A-levels. I'm sure you're going to do brilliantly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye.